We shall move to the Department of Nutritional Sciences, University of Toronto. Welcome. I'll allow you to introduce yourself, if that would be fine, so I don't mispronounce your name.
All right.
And the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, followed by 2 minutes of questioning from each party.
Thank you. All right, good morning. My name is Mary Scourboutakos. I am a PhD candidate from the University of Toronto, and I do research on the restaurant food supply and menu labeling. So I'm here today to speak with you about sodium, which really is the missing nutrient from Bill 45. There we go. So at the University of Toronto, we did a national survey of 3,000 Canadians, and we asked them, what nutrition information do you want to see on restaurant menus? And 71% of the consumers in our survey said that they want to see sodium on restaurant menus. Furthermore, we found that when we gave consumers menus with sodium and they used that information to influence their choice, the sodium content of their meal was decreased by 900 milligrams. That is a very significant decrease, and that is not insubstantial. So the take-home message from this research really is that consumers want to see sodium information on restaurant menus, and furthermore, we have evidence demonstrating that having sodium information present would benefit consumers. At the University of Toronto, we've also created a giant database of Canadian chain restaurant foods, all of the ones that you can see in this slide. And we've used this database to analyze a number of different nutrient levels in the restaurant food supply. In particularly, we've looked at sodium, and we've found that 85% of sit-down restaurant meals contain more than the daily recommended amount of sodium. When we published this data back in 2010, the industry's response was that they had gotten better. So this motivated us to recollect our data again and see, indeed, what improvements had been made. And what did we find? Well, we found that over that 3-year period, the number of foods containing more than a day's worth of sodium did not change. In fact, when you look at changes, we see that 54% of foods stayed the same, 30% decreased, albeit marginally, and 16% of foods increased over this 3-year period, to our surprise. So the take-home message here really is that sodium levels in restaurant foods continue to be unacceptably high. I think that the rationale for sodium labeling is pretty clear. We see data that it will help consumers to make informed choices. But the second point, and I think this is actually the more important point that's often overlooked, is the fact that sodium labeling will motivate restaurants to decrease sodium levels in their foods. And we've seen evidence of this in the United States, in King County, Washington, which is a district that has implemented not only calorie labeling, but also sodium labeling. They found that after the implementation of their menu labeling bill, the sodium levels in the entrees being offered in their city have actually decreased as a result of this policy. So as I begin to wrap up, I'd just like to review a few of the key points. What single nutrient kills 1.65 million people each year? That nutrient is sodium. What nutrient do 80% of Canadian men and 60 to 80% of Canadian women overconsume? Sodium. 85% of restaurant meals contain more than a day's worth of which nutrient? Sodium. What nutrient level got worse in 16% of restaurant foods over the last 3 years? Sodium. And finally, what nutrient do 71% of Canadians want to see on restaurant menus? Again, the answer is sodium. So to conclude, I have a little game for everyone in the room can participate. I'm showing you here 3 typical menu items that you can get at a popular chain that's located across Canada. And if I asked you to guess, which do you think has the most sodium, which would you think it is? And everyone you can raise your hand. Who thinks it's the large hot chocolate? Anybody? One? Who thinks it's the strawberry muffin? Any takers? Okay, and finally, who thinks it's the English muffin with cheese and eggs? A few, a lot of people not voting, that's okay. Let's see, in fact, the large hot chocolate is the highest sodium item in this collection. So I think this really illustrates the point that when you're dining out, you have no idea how much sodium is in the potential meal items that you could be ordering. And this is why sodium labeling is so important, and this is why Bill 45 should include mandatory sodium labeling on restaurant menus. Thank you for your time and for the privilege of allowing me to address you today. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So we'll start with the government side. Ms. Mr. Thibault.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. Like the Chair, I'm not going to try to attempt to say your last name. Is
That's
it
fine.
Scourboutakos?
Scourboutakos.
Thank you for
Easier
that.
than it looks.
So you've talked a lot about obviously sodium in your presentation, and you know the bill talks a lot about menu labeling as well. And I think one of the important aspects that maybe you could touch on is healthy weights and the importance, especially with you're talking a lot about restaurants and fast food, when it comes to children and childhood obesity. So maybe you could speak to some of that as well.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, sodium is an indirect contributor to unhealthy weights because we know when we eat a high salty meal, what happens? We get thirsty. And when you're in a restaurant, often the beverages that are accompanying your meal are sugar-sweetened beverages. So in fact, the salty food is propagating obesity by making us more thirsty. And if we're satisfying our thirst with sugar-sweetened beverages, that issue is becoming worse.
And so in relation to, I think part of your presentation was the drinks as well are high in sodium. If you could clarify that for me as well.
There's a number of beverages where you would find sodium. In a typical can of pop, you're just getting maybe like less than 100 milligrams. So that's not a huge amount. But in things like chocolate milk, and as we've learned in things like hot chocolate, you could be getting a third of a day's worth of sodium.
Excellent. And so do you think then menu labeling is an effective way to influence consumer choice towards healthier choices?
Well, our research has demonstrated that, in fact, it can have an influence. And as I said in the presentation, it's not just influencing consumer choices, but motivating the restaurants to reformulate. And we see evidence of this in the US, and I think this would give restaurants the incentive that they need to lower sodium and calorie levels in their foods.
How much time, Chair?
3 seconds.
Thank you very much for your
Thank you.
presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Thibault. Mr. Walker.
Thank you very much, Mary. You know, very interesting. One of the things that I was hoping to see in this bill when I saw the title come out was that there would be actually an area on physical activity, because I think that's huge. If we're going to actually make people healthier, help people be healthier, that's a key component. The other thing that I find very interesting, your stats were pretty compelling, and 71% of the population is saying that's the one stat they want on there. You did a lot of this research back in 2010, so there's no reason why it couldn't have been incorporated in that suggests that sodium is a big issue. Can you just expand a little on why you think that may not have made it? Were you given the opportunity? Did you make a submission? Were you able to consult with the government before this legislation came out? I'm struggling why, if this is such a big issue, why it would be left out of this bill.
A great point. We actually did a lot of work with Toronto Public Health, who, as you know, a few years ago, their Board of Health put forward a menu labeling proposition, and they were the ones who put pressure, I believe, on the Ontario government, saying if Ontario didn't move forward, Toronto Public Health was going to move forward. And Toronto Public Health was very clear in their recommendation, and it was based on our research, and they said you need to put calories and sodium information on that menu. We've also been in discussions with MPP France Gélinas, who has been an advocate for high sodium warning labels. So we have been involved in the process, definitely, and we always make our research very widely available. It's been covered substantially by the press, so I think that the information is out there and people are widely aware of it. And I'm not sure why the Liberal government chose not to include sodium as part of this bill.
Yeah, certainly I struggle with that as well. When it's as compelling as you've made it, a great presentation, it certainly is something I think everyone knows, or at least basically understands the impacts of sodium. Particularly if a health unit has gone to that extent, you've done the research, it's there, you presented. Were you directly able to be, either yourself or your department, have engagement with the Liberal government on this discussion, or did they ever approach you on it? I mean, it's one thing to have it all out there in the public domain, but did they actually, you know, if they've read this, you would have thought they'd have came and said, hey, tell us a bit more about this. We need to probably make sense of this.
We have met with the Ministry of Health. In the past, we exchanged many email communications with them, and they inquire about our work. We've also prepared a letter to the minister about the lack of sodium on as part of that bill. So I think we have made it very clear to them. We've presented this data at the ministry.
And they still chose not to put it in.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gélinas.
So I'm an easy sell. I want sodium to be included onto this bill. I want an amendment that would mandate sodium to be on the menu labeling. Do you know of any jurisdictions where you have sodium included on the menu?
Absolutely. So in King County, Washington, which is the jurisdiction I mentioned in my presentation, they mandate calorie and sodium and fat and carbohydrate labeling for other reasons, which we won't get into. And as I said, they have seen very positive decreases in the food supply. As well, I believe Philadelphia also has sodium labeling. So it's something that's happening and being discussed as well.
And those are the same type of restaurant that do work on both sides of the border, so you would catch the big chain which do business there. They have been able to modify their menu. How cumbersome was it? Like, is this something that you need binoculars to be able to get that information when you order your food?
Generally, the legislation tends to have the information at the same font as the price, so it's up there and you can see it, and it's pretty noticeable.
Okay, and so the restaurants south of the borders are able to get that information on the menu. Can you think of any reason why they would not be able to do that once they reach Ontario?
There's no clear reason. All of that information is publicly available online on their websites. It's just a matter of putting it up on their menu boards, and as we know, menu boards these days are digital. So I imagine that could be done overnight.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Scourboutakos.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming forward and providing us with very interesting information.